Her life was never easy, but there was one thing that always kept her going: the need to be strong. From a very young age, she learned that she couldn't fall apart. Not because she didn't want to, but because there simply wasn't room for it. Life didn't allow for long pauses when you're the pillar of a family. She woke up before everyone else. I was preparing the coffee. She organized the house. I was thinking about the bills.
I was thinking about my children.
I was thinking about tomorrow even before today was over. And even though she was tired, she kept going. Because stopping wasn't an option. The weight she carried wasn't just physical. It was emotional, mental, invisible. It was the kind of responsibility that doesn't show up in photos, but consumes you from the inside. People around her said she was strong. But nobody saw what happened when the house was silent. No one saw the nights when she sat in the kitchen after everyone was asleep, her head resting in her hands, trying to figure out how everything would continue to function the next day.
She didn't complain.
Not because there were no reasons, but because there was no time for it. Life demanded action, not pause. And she always chose to act. Until, on a seemingly ordinary day, something began to change. At first, they were small signs. A different kind of tiredness. A slight pain that wouldn't go away. A lack of energy that she easily ignored, attributing it to an excess of tasks. She told herself that it was normal. It's just exhaustion. It will pass. It gets better later. But it didn't get better. On the contrary, the days started to get harder. Climbing stairs required more effort. Simple tasks seemed more burdensome. And yet, she continued. Because stopping wasn't an option yet. Until the body began to speak louder than the mind could ignore. And then came the consultation. The hospital wasn't an unfamiliar place to her, but it wasn't familiar either. It was neutral. A place where people went when something was no longer right. She went in alone, as it has always been in so many other aspects of life. She sat in the waiting room, her gaze fixed on the floor, clutching her bag tightly as if that could keep her steady. When she was called, she stood up without hesitation. The doctor was direct. Exams, results, concerns, new tests, and then the silence before the sentence that would change everything. She realized something was wrong even before the words were spoken. There is a kind of silence that precedes difficult news. And she recognized it. The doctor took a deep breath. He looked at the papers one more time. And he spoke. The diagnosis didn't come as a loud shock. It came like a slow weight. It was as if the ground hadn't been pulled out from under her all at once, but rather little by little, without warning. She heard, but he didn't answer. She didn't cry immediately. He didn't react. Because for a few seconds, your brain simply couldn't process it. The words were there, but they didn't make sense. Illness.
Grave. Treatment.
Uncertainty. Everything seemed too far away. She nodded automatically, as if he were agreeing to something he didn't understand. And he left the room. It was only when she reached the hallway that reality began to set in. Slowly, heavy, irreversible, she stopped. And he remained motionless. The world around them continued. People walking, doctors calling out names, doors opening and closing. But inside her, everything had stopped. The body stiffened. The breathing changed. And then the tears came. Not tall, not dramatic, but silent.
Deep.
Broken. She sat down on a bench in the hallway without even realizing the exact moment she decided to sit down. His hands were trembling. His gaze was lost. And the thoughts began to shatter into pieces. And now? How will this affect my family? Who will take care of them? That last question hurt more than all the others. Because, for the first time, she wasn't thinking about herself. I was thinking about the role he always played. The one that provides support. The one that serves as the foundation. The one about being the person who never falls. And now, she was falling. The silence in the hospital corridor seemed heavier after the diagnosis was given. She remained seated on the bench, but now she was no longer truly there. Her body remained, but her mind had been cast aside, as if trying to comprehend something too great to be grasped all at once. People walked around, but no one noticed what was happening inside. And perhaps that was the strangest thing. Life continued as normal for everyone else, but not for her. She finally picked up her phone with trembling hands. The device felt heavier than usual, as if it carried the weight of the decision she needed to make, to tell or not to tell. The fingers paused on the screen. She hesitated, because there was a huge difference between feeling something inside and putting that feeling into words for someone else. How could I explain something that even she didn't understand yet? But there was another part of her that knew. She couldn't hide it. Not for long. He took a deep breath, and he called. The first touch seemed to last an eternity. When the voice on the other end answered, she tried to speak normally, but it failed. The words didn't come out as they should have. She tried again, and this time he succeeded. A few sentences. Fragmented. I am in the hospital. Silence on the other end. They did tests. More silence. And then came the phrase that changed the tone of the conversation. They said it's something serious. On the other end of the line, the voice changed.
Concern.
Confusion.
Fear.
Questions began to arise rapidly, but she couldn't answer them all. Not because she didn't want to, but because she didn't yet have all the answers. She ended the call too early. Not for lack of love, but due to lack of strength. And that destroyed her more than any diagnosis. Because at that moment,
if you wish to deepen your knowledge of Jesus, the Gospels, and the Christian life, I have prepared a complete guide that can help you on your faith journey. In addition to the main guide, you will receive 3 special bonuses today. The ebook, The Lost Parables, the Gospel Study Journal, and the guide, The Hebrew Mindset. If you found this content helpful, click the first link in the description to learn more. I hope this material helps you further understand Christ's message and strengthen your spiritual journey.
she realized something cruel. She would no longer be able to protect everyone as she always had. When she hung up the phone, she leaned her head against the wall behind her. And he closed his eyes. The world seemed quieter now. But it wasn't a comfortable silence. It was a silence that was oppressive. That reminded me, which he repeated. You can no longer be everything to everyone. She squeezed her eyes shut tightly.
I didn't want to accept that.
I couldn't accept that, because her entire identity was built on being strong, being present, being a constant support. If she would stop, what would happen to the others? This question began to grow inside her like a shadow. Later, she was taken to an observation room. The white walls seemed even colder inside. The smell of the hospital was strong, almost invasive. The sound of the medical equipment created a constant soundtrack of reality. She lay down on the bed, but she didn't rest. He stared at the ceiling. Property, while thoughts piled up without order. The diagnosis was no longer just a sentence. It was a presence. Something that was there, even when nobody was talking about it. She thought about her children. At home. In the routine. In the accounts. In everything that depended on her. And for the first time, the fear wasn't just about the body. It was about the future. She turned to the side. And the crying returned. Stronger now.
Deeper.
Because now it wasn't just about her anymore. It was all she stood for. And the feeling that it could all crumble at any moment was almost unbearable. She tried to calm down. He took a deep breath.
Once. Twice.
But the air didn't seem to solve anything. And then came the worst part of the night. Silence. As the lights dimmed and the hospital settled into a quieter state, everything inside it grew louder. The thoughts wouldn't stop. What if I get worse? What if I can't continue? Who will take care of them? Each question seemed heavier than the last. She turned her face to the side. And she closed her eyes tightly. But there was no escape. Because even in the dark, the mind continued to show images. And they all weighed the same. She wasn't just sick. She was ceasing to be the pillar she had always been. And that broke her inside. Then, sometime in the early morning, something strange happened. Not in the environment, but inside it. A small thought came to mind. Almost shy. Almost improbable. What if there's still something I'm not seeing? She opened her eyes immediately, as if she had been surprised by her own thought. It wasn't hope yet. It wasn't complete faith. But it was a crack in the despair. And at that moment, she didn't realize it. But that small crack would be the beginning of everything. The early morning seemed longer than any other she had ever experienced. The hospital room was silent, but not that gentle silence that brings rest. It was a thick, heavy silence, as if the air had grown heavier after everything that had happened. She was still lying there, but sleep wouldn't come. Her eyes remained open, fixed on the white ceiling, trying to find some order amidst the chaos within her own mind. The diagnosis was still there, not as an isolated thought, but as a constant presence. Something that wouldn't go away. Something that settled in her, without asking permission. She turned slightly in bed. The sheet was cold, the tired body, but the mind remained too awake. The images kept returning uncontrollably. The conversation in the doctor's office. The doctor's perspective. Difficult words. The silence after the news. And above all, the fear of what that meant for the family that depended on her. She closed her eyes tightly, but it was no use, because what was inside her didn't need light to continue existing. The most painful thought returned like an echo. If I can't continue, what will happen to them? This question had no simple answer, and perhaps that's why it hurts so much. She took a deep breath.
Once. Twice.
But the air seemed to offer no relief to his chest. It was as if something invisible was pressing from the inside. The body was there, but it felt like I was in constant decline. No ground to stand on. Without support. Without direction. She turned her face towards the window. Outside, the night was deep. No stars visible. No movement. Just darkness. And for some reason, this seemed to reflect exactly what she felt inside. But then something started to change. Not in the environment. The hospital remained the same. The room remained unchanged. But inside her, there was a slight shift in perception. She couldn't explain when it started. Perhaps it was only a second. Perhaps a different thought amidst so many similarities. But something caught his attention in a new way. A silence within silence. She opened her eyes once more. And she remained quiet. There was nothing visible. Nothing concrete. But there was a strange feeling. As if the void weren't completely empty. She tried to ignore it. It's just tiredness, he thought. It's just the impact of the diagnosis. But the feeling didn't go away. On the contrary, she seemed to grow when she was silent. That bothered her. And at the same time it calmed her down. Because, for the first time since the diagnosis, fear wasn't the only thing present inside her. There was something more. Small. Indefinite. But real enough to be felt. The hours passed slowly. The early morning hours wore on. The hospital continued at its almost non-existent pace of distant sounds and dim lights. And inside that room, she began to think differently. Not just in terms of what could go wrong, but also in what was still there. She was still breathing. I could still feel it. He was still conscious. She was still alive. These things seemed simple, but that night they started to gain weight. She placed her hand on her chest. He felt his heart beating. Constant. Present. Real. And this brought about something unexpected. Awareness of continuity.
If you wish to deepen your knowledge of Jesus, the Gospels, and the Christian life, I have prepared a complete guide that can help you on your faith journey. In addition to the main guide, you will receive 3 special bonuses today. The ebook, The Lost Parables, the Gospel Study Journal, and the guide, The Hebrew Mindset. If you found this content helpful, click the first link in the description to learn more. I hope this material helps you further understand Christ's message and strengthen your spiritual journey.
Even broken. Even though I was scared. Even without answers. She was still there. And that meant something. The tears returned. But this time it wasn't just despair. They were different. Quieter. Deeper. Less chaotic. As if something inside her was beginning to release what had been trapped for a long time. She closed her eyes again. And for the first time that night, he didn't try to escape his thoughts. She let it all come.
Fear.
It hurts. Uncertainty. But it also brought something new, a small possibility of continuing. Not like before. But somehow, she took a deep breath. And he whispered almost voicelessly, I don't know how, but I'm still here. And at that moment, the silence in the room changed. Not because it got lighter, but because he stopped being an enemy. He simply existed alongside her. And that was enough to keep her from completely falling apart. The first light of morning timidly entered the room. It wasn't a sudden flash, nor something that changed everything at once. It was just a brighter shade appearing on the edge of the window, as if the world outside was reminding us that the day still needed to happen. Inside the room, she was still lying down, but something about her was no longer quite the same as the night before. My body was still tired. The weight of the diagnosis had not disappeared. Nothing external had been resolved. But internally, there was a subtle difference, almost imperceptible, but real. She took a deep breath, and he realized that for the first time in many hours, the air seemed to be flowing in a little more easily. She turned slightly in bed. The sheet was still cold. The walls were still white. The hospital was still a hospital. But the way she viewed all of this had changed. The silence, which had previously seemed overwhelming, no longer had the same impact. He was there, but he no longer had complete control. She placed her hand on her chest again. He felt it in his heart. Constant, persistent, stubbornly alive. And that brought a strange feeling. It wasn't joy. It wasn't complete relief. It was something simpler. Reality. She was still here. It still existed. I could still feel it. I could still think. And as long as these things remained true, there was still a way. The tears returned once more. But now they were different. These were not just tears of despair. They were tears of understanding, acceptance of what could not be changed at that moment, and a small opening to what could still be experienced. She closed her eyes, and without realizing it, he began to remember something that had always been present in his life, but which perhaps had been stifled by the weight of responsibilities.
Faith.
Not as an immediate answer, not as a magic solution, but as a memento, something that existed within her, even when she wasn't paying attention. She didn't start speaking loudly. There were no grand gestures. There were no dramatic revelations. It was something simple, almost silent. If I'm still here, then maybe I'm not alone. This statement was not presented as a certainty. It came up as a possibility, but that was enough to change the internal tone of that moment. She took another deep breath, and for the first time since the diagnosis, he didn't just think about what he had lost. He also thought about what still existed. She still had her family. I still had responsibilities. There were still challenges. But there was also something else that couldn't be measured by tests. Inner strength. Even though it's small, even wounded. She sat down slowly on the bed. The movement was slight, but significant. The body was still weak. But there was intention. There was a presence. There was a choice. She looked out the window. The morning light was now brighter. The day had begun. And with him, something inside her also seemed to have begun. Not a cure. Not a complete transformation. But it's a process. She took another deep breath. And he whispered in a low, almost broken but firm voice, "I don't know what will happen, but I will continue." The silence around them offered no answer. But he didn't crush her either. He simply stayed. Now as a company. Not as an enemy. And in that space between pain and hope, between fear and faith, she found something she didn't expect to find in that hospital. The ability to not give up today. And for the first time, that was enough.